On today's World Insight, China pushes for its initiative on no first use of nuclear arms. What difference can the initiative make if the world's nuclear powers are open to it? How can the initiative work in easing the chances of nuclear annihilation? Answers from retired PLA Sr. Colonel Zhou Bo, who recently wrote a published article on how China and the U.S. can lead the way in lowering the nuclear threat.
Hello and welcome to World Insight with me, Tian. As the Russia-Ukraine conflict continues to escalate, China submitted a working paper on its no first use of nuclear weapons initiative in July. It encourages the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council to work on a treaty agreeing to no first use of nuclear weapons or to declare such an intention. The treaty seeks international peace and security. On August 21st, Zhou Bo, a senior fellow at the Center for International Strategy and Security with Tsinghua University, published an article in Foreign Policy, pointing out that among the 5 signatories of the Treaty on the Nonproliferation of Nuclear Weapons, only China has declared a no first use policy so far. It argued that no first use of nuclear weapons is a big step forward for all. The 5 nuclear-armed Permanent Security Council members have agreed earlier that a nuclear war cannot be won and must never be fought. On this and more, I had an exclusive interview with Senior Colonel Zhou Bo. Let's listen in. Joining me in the studio, Zhou Bo, Senior Fellow from the Center for International Security and Strategy with Tsinghua University. Senior Colonel Zhou, what a pleasure to see you.
Nice to meet you again.
Thank you so much for joining us in the studio. I've been reading word by word your latest article in Foreign Policy about China's commitment to no first use of nuclear weapons. There are several questions come to my mind. First of all, it is very clear that China is among the 5 nuclear states that has been committing to non-proliferation treaty, which has been signed on by almost 200 states around the world. China is the only one that has been committed so far to no first use of nuclear weapon. But looking at decades of peace we've already had since the Second World War, how do you see the significance still for others to commit after all?
That is a very good question, because during the Cold War, the 2 superpowers have been actually competing with one another to build more and more nuclear weapons, but eventually they concluded that a nuclear war cannot be won, therefore it should never be fought. Then come all kinds of reductions of nuclear weapons, even during the Cold War. But right now, very interesting but very sad to see actually nuclear weapons seems to have gained kind of a new importance in that in the battlefield of Ukraine, we actually have heard, frankly speaking, from Russia time and again, some hints about the use of nuclear weapons. President Putin talked in May during Victory Day that the strategic forces are always in a state of combat readiness. Yeah? This certainly has alerted NATO and all other countries. Then, as a response, the United States is talking about, for example, to conduct a new nuclear test. Mr. Robert O'Brien, who was the national security advisor to President Trump, openly urged him to conduct a nuclear test if Donald Trump is re-elected. NATO is talking about deploying some more nuclear weapons in the battlefield. So against all this background, I believe it's really, really important to encourage what China has been proposing, that is no first use of nuclear weapons.
Having said that, though, even if countries committed to no first use of nuclear weapons, is there a way to verify it to begin with? Secondly, how do you make sure that those words will be carried out into actions once crisis elevated?
Well, it's very easy to verify because if you have pledged no first use, if you use it, everybody knows it.
Right.
Yeah. So
but that's too late anyway, right?
That is too late. So a pledge actually is a kind of promise, but this promise is made by a nuclear power, a global power, a major power to the world. Therefore, people will see whether you can really honor your promise or not. Because in the past, actually for 6 decades, China has been upholding these principles. Some people may say, okay, you just say that as kind of a lip service. But then my argument is, why can't you make the same lip service?
If it were lip service.
Yeah, if everybody makes such a lip service, then it is actually in the eyes of the people around the world. People will see whether you are telling the truth or you are really honoring your pledge. If everybody makes the same pledge, then it's a good thing. Yeah, it's such a wonderful thing for the world.
Russia, for example, recently, if you read references and scholar articles about Russia's strategy, some suggest, quote unquote, escalate to de-escalate, meaning that there are certain suggestions of using strategic weapons by Russia when circumstances arise. But at the same time, it is not very clear indication. So it's up to interpretation. But certainly there is already elevated, shall I say, awareness of that danger coming from Russia by the others, by Russia saying so. So it's called escalate to de-escalate in order to give Russia some strategic space and time to proceed with what they consider as the most important national interest. So, Senior Colonel Zhou, what about that Russia approach? How shall we see Russia be able to come around from that escalate to de-escalate to what you call to promise no first use of nuclear weapons?
But it's a number of good questions altogether.
All right.
But first of all, this is a typical strategy, in nuclear weapons, because you first escalate it. That basically is a kind of threat or bluff about the possibility of you using nuclear weapons. Your purpose is to frighten the other side, so to let them surrender, without actually using nuclear weapons. Because if you really use nuclear weapons, then you don't know how the other side might respond.
Right.
If it happens to be NATO, if it happens to be another nuclear power, this kind of scale of your enemy's response is not controllable.
So there's a deterrence threat.
Yeah. So it works best as a strategy, right? But has this strategy worked or not? Yes, it has worked. It has worked tremendously for Russia because right now we are seeing no NATO troops in Ukraine. I believe to a large extent this kind of strategy has worked. So it is indeed difficult for Russia to honor this no first use strategy. But the question is, if they continue to walk down the road, then it actually would create a dilemma for themselves, right? Would you really use it or not? If you just bluff too many times, then people probably would not be so serious about it, and you certainly would not look good because this is highly, highly immoral, really, for anyone to use a nuclear weapon again. So I think Russia is caught in this kind of dilemma, and the reason behind is because Russia's conventional forces, haven't performed as well as they have expected. In fact, after the dissolution of the Soviet Union, the Russia's conventional forces have actually become somewhat weakened compared to the time of the Cold War. So that is why Russia actually has picked up this kind of strategy of using nuclear weapon, possibly, sometimes, first.
What about the United States? We saw the two administrations, the Trump and the Biden administration, have pledged different things during their time in the White House. And one might argue they have never suggested clearly that there is an option of no first use of nuclear weapons. So, Senior Colonel Zhou, it seems that Washington is also very far, if not further, away from that commitment.
Well, President Biden's ideas are not that very far from China's.
What do you mean?
Yeah, because in Americans' nuclear posture review, the United States actually has pledged not to use nuclear weapon except in extreme circumstances in defense of America's vital national interest and in defense of the allies' interest. Then it comes to two questions. First of all, what kind of a vital American national interest need America to use nuclear weapons first? Yeah, well, okay, this is the question raised by the United States, but it's really difficult for people to think. Then it comes to allies.
Well,
yeah.
They try to maintain a strategic vagueness about that and therefore be able to determine what they consider as the enemy.
Well, that could be argued like that. But so first of all, you have to think of what kind of a vital national interest the United States would have, yeah, to justify such use of nuclear weapons. I don't think that, at least I don't believe that there is anything like that. And then its allies definitely want Americans' nuclear umbrella. That is true, because in Asia, for example, we sometimes would hear some remarks from North Korea about use of nuclear weapons. But in a real situation, I don't believe North Korea would really use nuclear weapons because geography would not lie, because the whole Korean Peninsula is just 1,200 kilometers. So for anyone to launch a nuclear attack, it would be suicidal because of the radioactive dust. So therefore, I believe this kind of a scenario is just a hypothetical scenario.
Now, Senior Colonel Zhou, according to the latest media reports, one I read lately from the New York Times, a classified document approved in March, it suggested the U.S. President Joe Biden ordered U.S. forces to prepare for, quote, possible coordinated nuclear confrontations with Russia, China, and North Korea, meaning the DPRK, end of quote. Now, how do you articulate, Senior Colonel Zhou, media reports about suggested government decisions in the U.S. that seem to paint what they consider as a perfect scenario for the U.S. to use nuclear weapons?
I think this is totally unjustifiable. I'm aware of what you said, but first of all, think of this kind of relationship, yeah, among China, Russia, and DPRK. Is there such an alliance? No. I think everybody would agree that there is no such alliance. Then how come we could have this kind of a coordination, yeah, of nuclear weapons against the United States? Yeah. Then, if there is no such a kind of alliance, then America's nuclear arsenal is 10 times bigger than China's, even if CPRI is correct, right? Because they have 5,000 and we have 500. Yeah. So therefore, why would they be alerted? Yeah. People talking about how China's nuclear modernization has been going on. Well, there might be a kind of truth in it, because we also need to modernize our nuclear arsenal. It's not a secret, because with our development in our other services such as Air Force, Navy, yeah, and we also need to modernize our nuclear arsenal to make it work. So therefore, this kind of changes might happen, but still, if CPRI is correct, we're just 1/10 of American nuclear arsenal.
China and Russia, when the two leaders met in the year 2023, they were suggesting to the rest of the world about what they consider as the nature of any possibility of nuclear war. Tell us more about that.
Well, what you said is true, because during President Xi Jinping's visit to Moscow, we had a bilateral agreement in which this sentence is mentioned again: nuclear war cannot be won, therefore it should never be fought. That is extremely interesting, in that Russia in the past has actually hinted about the use of nuclear weapons, but after the two leaders meeting, so we come back to rationale. It seems that, okay, people are talking about the old, same correct things. So this actually is China's contribution, I would say.
I remember it was reported widely all over the world about that statement.
Right, because that would be a huge relief for the whole world, if Russia declared that it would not use nuclear weapon in Europe. And this has been China's policy. No use of nuclear weapons in Europe, because we, from day one, is against the use of nuclear weapons, especially against nuclear weapon-free countries or nuclear weapon-free zones.
What about China and DPRK, since these three countries have been mentioned? China has been one of the most active players in the six-party talks. Well, what is six-party talks? It's about countries that see there should not be any nuclear conflict on the Korean Peninsula, or in other words, should be non-proliferation on the nuclear peninsula. DPRK, South Korea certainly participated, so did Japan, and China, United States, Russia. So when there were suggestions coming from the Biden administration talking about China and DPRK in alliance for any kind of a nuclear attack, what went through your mind, Senior Colonel Zhou, while knowing very well the history of six-party talks?
Well, there are a number of questions in your good questions, because China and the DPRK actually had a mutual treaty in the past, but I believe that this treaty is very much dormant, because you would have no evidence whatsoever of China strengthening its military ties with North Korea, as we actually have done with Russia. We have a lot of exercises, so on and so forth, but you never read any report that China and North Korea doing joint exercises, so on and so forth. It's interesting for you to mention North Korea because actually it is a de facto nuclear weapon states. Now, just now we were talking about the 5 nuclear powers who at the same time are members of the UN Security Council, but then there are 4 de facto nuclear weapon states, India, Pakistan, Israel, and DPRK. So that is a fact. When we come to six-party talks, of course we know all this, the 5 countries would try to resolve this issue, but they actually have failed because they did not succeed. But anyway, this is a great attempt in non-proliferation. So no first use actually is also part of the non-proliferation, right? Because if all these countries behave themselves to conduct a self-restraint, then this certainly is good news for the world.
What about the situation now? As we see, people would say, the geopolitical competition between China and the United States. There is also what some believe as issues in China's neighborhood, while China holds very dear to its heart territorial integrity and sovereignty. So how do you understand China's position now? Can China stick to its commitment of no first use of nuclear weapons?
First of all, I think China can and should really stick to no first use of nuclear weapon, because everybody can wait and see whether China will honor its promise or not, right?
China has been, right? Since the year 1964.
Of course, So unless China use nuclear weapons first, then people would say, China has been upholding its principle. But there are indeed some people from the United States talking about a scenario in Taiwan that, okay, PLA might be the first to use nuclear weapons if PLA failed in a conventional warfare. And then there are
you heard scenarios like this being thrown around a lot.
And then there are other people who say, okay, because our American conventional forces would not be strong enough to deter China, therefore we should be the first one to use nuclear weapons in Taiwan Strait. So you have two kinds of people who just argue in different ways. But I would say on the first scenario of PLA using nuclear weapons first against what we call the compatriots in Taiwan, this is totally impossible. First of all, there is no guarantee that we have to use force yeah, to resolve this issue, because we in China are still talking about peaceful reunification,
right,
because we believe it's still possible. So there are three conditions in which we might apply non-peaceful means, yeah, to resolve this issue. But I believe we would never, yeah, use nuclear weapons against our own people.
Then why do you think, as you said, in the US there are scenarios like this being created about China's possible use of nuclear weapons as they claim? Why there are so many different versions being invented?
Well, I think that is because they are thinking about a scenario that mainland China uses conventional forces but could not win. But we cannot afford to lose. Therefore, we have to use something decisive. That is a nuclear weapon. I don't think so, because if you compare the military strengths, yeah, between the two sides across the strait, I would say with certainty that our military strength is overwhelming. Yeah. But then there is a question whether the United States would come to Taiwan's assistance or not. That is a very ambiguous question, right? But from what we have read, I would say that there are more and more reports, yeah, telling us that actually the United States is not as confident as before to be involved physically in a conflict in Taiwan Strait, because the PLA is growing stronger. It's too far away from the United States. The United States do not have many military allies who are wholeheartedly supportive of American involvement, so on and so forth.
What about China's neighbors? Now we see China and Japan are still struggling with the history issues, while at the same time, Japan has been quite aggressive in expressing its views about what they consider as the Taiwan issue. Now, also, we see China honor its territorial integrity and sovereignty, and the latest we have seen in the South China Sea, for example, what's going on between China and the Philippines. Even though those are only minor stories on a daily basis, but people are looking at what could be the scenario. So, Senior Colonel Zhou, your thoughts on this?
Well, you're right in pointing out that China actually is the only major power who hasn't resolved this issue of reunification. So China actually is still divided, right? But then, as I said before, geography would not lie. Then I tell you another thing that would not lie, that is the defense budget. For decades, China's defense budget remains under 2%, which is a NATO standard, of GDP. It tells you a lot about China, because no matter what you say, right, your defense budget tells best about yourself and about what you think. Then it tells you about China on what? It tells that China is confident about itself. It tells China is confident about the whole regional situation. It tells that China is even confident about managing China-US relationship. Because if you panic, what are you going to do? You're going to increase your defense budget. And this is exactly what has happened in recent years to India and to Japan. Japan actually has doubled its defense budget, right? Because it has lost its kind of calmness of mind. For some reasons, it is decided to drastically increase defense budget. But China is stable. China is calm. And China's calm and confidence matters tremendously in this region, because it would serve as an anchor of people's confidence. If China starts to drastically increase the defense budget, it will create a big effect.
The other thing, let's take a look, is about China. Well, people say China has committed back in the 1964 onward about no first use of nuclear weapons. That is a very grand moral gesture. But certainly it has implications about the nature of China's nuclear power, and also about what China wants to do with its military power. So, Senior Colonel Zhou, as a former member of China's PLA, how do you understand the real purpose of China's nuclear weapon development?
I think China's nuclear strategy is still to keep it small but effective. Yeah. Then the question is, how small is small, right? And so you can never say that, okay, being small means it is 100 or 200 for sure, because it has to change with the changes in the international situation.
Right.
Yeah. But I believe this kind of attitude of pledging no first use would work best, because if just think of it, no matter how many you want, if you say, I want to be the first to use, that gives people some sort of assurance and relief, right? Because if you violate that, people will know that, yeah? So on this line, I believe everybody is equal. So if we all have said something like a nuclear war cannot be won, then why we just go down a step further to say no first use, yeah? And this is politically relevant in that all the 5 nuclear weapon states have actually made another pledge, that is non-targeting of nuclear weapons at each other. This happened in after India-Pakistan nuclear test in 1998. Then China and the United States quickly came to an agreement. Okay, we too would not target our nuclear weapons at each other.
Right.
Yeah. So because China and the United States have agreed, it becomes very easy for the other 3 countries to join. So we have a record. That is, 5 nuclear weapon states have agreed not to target nuclear weapons at each other. This is good. But the other thing is, how do you know that we're not targeting at each other?
Right.
Because it's not verifiable. Although it is not verifiable, at least this is a good gesture.
Right.
Yeah, it gives people some kind of relief. But if we agree on no first use of nuclear weapon,
one step forward, certainly.
Yeah. But if we agree on no first use nuclear weapon, this would be another much bigger step forward. How important are nuclear weapons? My answer is they're not so important. Look at the United States, who has fought Vietnam War, Afghan War, Iraq War. But the United States has lost the war. Again, the Soviet Union lost its war in Afghanistan. And again, Russia is not winning, at least at this moment, a war in Ukraine. So nuclear weapons have not helped them. So that is my answer. Let's come to talk about the no first use of nuclear weapons.
Senior Colonel Zhou Bo, always a pleasure talking to you. Certainly a lot of inspirational ideas coming from you. We hope there will be in-depth and sophisticated discussions about these possibilities. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That is my latest interview with Senior Colonel Zhou Bo, who wrote a recent article on foreign policy arguing for no first use of nuclear weapons among the 5 nuclear powers. And that's all the time we have for today. If you'd like to know more, search World Insight, check out our YouTube channel, follow us on X and Facebook. I'm Tian Wei on behalf of the team. Thanks for being with us. Bye for now.